The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council chamber sparkled under the light of three suns. Inside, 2,000 representatives from across the galaxy shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. At the center platform, lead researcher Green's tail twitched nervously as he adjusted his data screen. His scales had taken on a pale shade, a clear sign of stress among his species. He cleared his throat, a habit he had picked up from spending too much time around humans. "Honorable council members," he began, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Today's report focuses on our most unusual member species, humans." A collective murmur swept through the chamber. In the front row, Dr. Gray, Earth's representative, sat straight-backed and calm. She was the only human in the room, and unlike the concerned faces around her, she looked almost amused. "Our latest study reveals disturbing patterns," Green continued, bringing up a holographic display. "Humans consistently ignore probability calculations, safety protocols, and logical risk assessments. But here's the most troubling part. They succeed anyway." The display showed various incidents: a human ship diving into a gas giant to rescue a stranded vessel, miners trapped underground being saved by a makeshift drill that should have collapsed, and a space station being repaired during a solar storm that should have killed everyone involved. By our calculations, each of these events had a success probability of less than 1%, Green explained, his voice rising with frustration. Yet the humans attempted them anyway, and succeeded. A council member with crystalline features raised a glowing appendage. Could this be a flaw in their risk assessment capabilities? "We considered that," Green replied. "But humans can calculate risks perfectly well. They simply choose to ignore them." Dr. Gray's quiet chuckle drew several disapproving looks. She didn't seem to notice or care. "What's most alarming," Green continued, "is that this behavior appears to be spreading. Other species working with humans are beginning to show similar disregard for statistical impossibilities." He pulled up another chart showing increased rates of illogical decision-making among species who frequently interacted with humans. The chamber erupted in concerned whispers. The High Speaker, an ancient being of pure energy contained within a floating orb, moved forward. "Dr. Gray," their translated voice resonated through the chamber. "How do you explain your species' complete disregard for mathematical certainty?" Dr. Gray stood up, straightening her simple blue uniform. "With respect, High Speaker, humans don't disregard mathematical certainty. We simply believe that statistics are suggestions, not rules." The chamber burst into shocked exclamations. Several members required calming substances. "Suggestions." Green's scales turned almost white. "Probability is not a suggestion. It's a fundamental law of reality." "Is it?" Dr. Gray smiled. "Because according to your own data, we've broken those laws 47 times in the past year alone. And those are just the officially recorded incidents. A tall plant-like being swayed in distress. Are you saying there are more?" "Oh, many more," Dr. Gray nodded. "We don't usually bother reporting things unless they're really unusual. By our standards, that is." Green's tail went completely stiff. "By your standards, you mean you consider some impossible achievements too routine to report?" "Well, yes," Dr. Gray shrugged. "If we reported every time a human did something with a sub-1% chance of success, we'd be drowning in paperwork." The High Speaker's orb flickered rapidly, their species equivalent of a deep sigh. "Then what do you suggest we do about this situation?" "Do?" Dr. Gray looked genuinely puzzled. "Why do we need to do anything? This is just who we are. Humans don't care about impossible odds. We never have. It's worked out pretty well for us so far." As the chamber descended into chaos, with various species calling for everything from quarantine protocols to mandatory human logic training, Dr. Gray sat back down. She pulled out her data pad and began reviewing reports of 3 other impossible rescue missions currently being planned by human teams. Some things, she thought, would never change. And that was perfectly fine with her. Looking at the chaos in the council chamber, Dr. Gray's mind drifted back to humanity's first contact with the Galactic Federation. It had happened just 5 years ago, though sometimes it felt like yesterday. The massive cargo ship Star Wanderer had been drifting in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter when its engines failed. This wasn't just any cargo ship, it was the first alien vessel humans had ever encountered, and it was about to crash into a cluster of asteroids. Captain Ross of the mining vessel, Earth's Hope, had been the closest to the scene. The weathered captain, with his gray beard and constant coffee mug in hand, had received the alien distress signal. The message was just mathematical equations, universal enough for humans to understand the basics. Ship in trouble. Help needed. Collision imminent. Earth's Hope wasn't even a rescue vessel, Dr. Gray remembered, smiling at what happened next. The alien ship's crew, a mix of different species, had sent detailed probability calculations along with their distress call. The number showed a 99.97% chance that any rescue attempt would result in both ships being destroyed. The message included what they thought was a clear warning. Rescue impossible. Stay away. Captain Ross had looked at those numbers, taken a sip of his coffee, and said 6 words that would become famous across the galaxy. Well, that leaves us 0.03%. Let's go. His crew hadn't even questioned the decision. Within minutes, they had powered up their mining vessel's engines and headed straight for the damaged alien ship. The aliens, watching the small Earth ship approach, had frantically sent more warnings, more calculations, more reasons why this was suicide. Hearing those first alien transmissions was amazing, one of Ross's crew later said. We couldn't understand the language, but boy, could we tell they were cursing at us. The rescue itself had been both brilliant and terrifying. Captain Ross had used his ship's mining lasers, designed to cut through asteroids, to clear a path. Then, in a move that made the aliens shriek in their various languages, he had attached his ship's magnetic mining clamps to the Star Wanderer's hull. The next part had been pure human improvisation. Unable to tow the massive cargo ship to safety, Ross had instead used his ship's thrusters to change their combined trajectory. Rather than fighting the asteroid field, he had used it. Each carefully calculated collision with smaller asteroids had pushed them in a new direction, like a cosmic game of billiards. It shouldn't have worked, the alien captain later reported to the Federation. According to every calculation, it was physically impossible. Yet these humans treated it like a game. Their captain was even laughing. When both ships finally cleared the asteroid field, the aliens had been too shocked to even celebrate. Their rescue, according to their math, had been impossible. Yet here they were, alive, saved by a species that hadn't even achieved faster-than-light travel yet. That's the day the Federation learned about humans, Dr. Gray thought, watching the current council meeting dissolve into arguments. And they still haven't figured us out. The incident had fast-tracked Earth's invitation into the Galactic Federation. It had also started a debate that continued to this day. Were humans incredibly brave, or just too stupid to understand probability? Captain Ross's answer, when asked this question at the first official Federation meeting, had become another classic quote. Numbers are great for counting things, but they're terrible at measuring human stubbornness. Dr. Gray pulled up the old incident report on her datapad. The Federation had created 17 new safety protocols after that day, all of which humans routinely ignored when someone needed help. They had also created a special classification for human rescue missions, probability-exempt events. Looking up at the Council's continuing argument about human behavior, Dr. Gray couldn't help but smile. Some things never changed. The Federation was still trying to make sense of humanity, and humanity was still too busy doing the impossible to notice. Captain Ross would love this, she thought, making a mental note to send him a copy of today's meeting minutes. He always enjoyed a good laugh. Dr. Blue had always prided himself on being logical. As the Federation's top behavioral scientist, he had studied hundreds of species. But humans, Humans gave him headaches. Begin research log. He spoke to his floating data recorder. Day 127 of the human behavior investigation. The sleek laboratory aboard the Federation science vessel Truth Seeker hummed quietly around him. Holographic displays covered the walls, each showing different scenes from human history. The Council's request to understand human decision-making continues to present unique challenges, he continued, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of deep thought among his species. Today's historical analysis has revealed more disturbing patterns. He waved his hand, bringing up footage from Earth's history. The Wright brothers' first flight, the moon landing, the Mars colony, the deep-sea cities. Every major human achievement, he noted, was preceded by experts saying it was impossible. His voice carried a mix of frustration and fascination. They appear to take these statements not as warnings, but as challenges. His research team, made up of the galaxy's finest minds, had spent months studying humans. They had reviewed thousands of incidents, analyzed countless decisions, and interviewed hundreds of humans. The results made no sense. Computer, display case study 47, Dr. Blue commanded. A hologram appeared, showing a human fire crew rushing into a burning building marked for demolition. The structure was already collapsing. Every calculation showed 0 survivors inside. Yet the humans went in anyway. They found 3 living people in the basement, Dr. Blue dictated, hidden in a reinforced vault that our sensors hadn't detected. The humans claimed they had a feeling someone was still alive. He pulled up another case, a human doctor trying an untested treatment on a dying patient, ignoring all protocols. The patient survived. Then another, a human pilot flying through a storm that should have torn their ship apart. They made it. The pattern is becoming clear, Dr. Blue spoke, his skin shifting to a darker shade of its natural purple, indicating deep concern. Humans don't just ignore probability. They actively defy it. His assistant, Dr. White, entered the lab carrying more data crystals. "Sir, you need to see this," she said, her crystalline form glittering under the lab lights. "We found something concerning." The new data showed something unexpected. Species working closely with humans were beginning to show similar behaviors. A Federation captain had attempted a human-style rescue last week. A non-human medical team had tried an impossible procedure yesterday. It's spreading, Dr. Blue realized, like some sort of behavioral virus. He brought up his final report for the Council. The numbers were clear. Every year since first contact, the number of impossible successes across the Federation had increased. The humans were changing how other species thought about probability. "Computer, add final observation," Dr. Blue said. "The most troubling aspect isn't that humans ignore probability. It's that they're teaching others to ignore it too. And somehow, it's working." He reviewed the footage one more time. A human child learning to ride a bicycle, falling again and again, but keeping at it. A team of human scientists working on a problem their own calculations said was unsolvable. A human rescue team saying, "We have to try," despite being told their mission had a 0% chance of success. Conclusion, he dictated. Humans appear to possess a unique trait, the ability to succeed not despite ignoring probability, but because of it. Their stubborn refusal to accept mathematical impossibility somehow warps reality itself. Dr. Blue looked at his final report. The Council wouldn't like it. It went against everything the Federation believed about how the universe worked. But the evidence was undeniable. "Final recommendation," he added, "stop trying to make humans follow probability calculations. Instead, study how they break them. The Federation needs to understand this ability before it spreads further." As he finished his report, an alert flashed on his screen. Another impossible human success had just been recorded. Dr. Blue didn't even feel surprised anymore. "Computer, end log," he said, watching the new data come in. "And maybe add a note. The humans might be crazy, but their kind of crazy seems to work. Red emergency lights flashed throughout the council chamber. The massive space station, Unity Point, the Federation's largest habitat near Earth, was in critical condition. A micrometeorite, no bigger than a coin, had punched through its main reactor at just the wrong angle. All safety protocols demand immediate evacuation, the Station I announced. Its holographic form flickered as power fluctuated. Reactor collapse in 47 minutes. Survival probability 0% if evacuation is delayed. The council members watched in horror as the station's 12,000 residents began moving to escape pods, but they weren't moving fast enough. The evacuation would take at least 2 hours. There wasn't enough time. That's when Captain Ross's voice crackled over the emergency channel. Unity Point, this is Earth Rescue Vessel Second Chance. We're coming in. Dr. Gray watched the council's reaction. Several members nearly fainted. Others started yelling at the communications officer to stop the humans. They all remembered Captain Ross from the first contact incident. Captain Ross, the Station I responded. Our calculations show any rescue attempt will trigger an immediate reactor collapse. Please maintain safe distance. There was that familiar chuckle over the radio. Yeah, we got those numbers. Thing is, we did our own math. Found something interesting. Dr. Gray smiled. She knew that tone in Ross's voice. He had a crazy plan. If we can't stop the reactor from collapsing, Ross continued, maybe we can control how it collapses. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Control a reactor collapse. It was madness. Impossible. Suicidal. But Ross was already explaining his plan. His ship would fire mining lasers at precise points around the damaged reactor. The controlled damage would direct the eventual explosion outward, away from the residential sections. It might buy them enough time to evacuate everyone. The chance of success is... The Station I began. Don't tell me the odds, Ross interrupted. Just keep those people moving. We'll handle the rest. Dr. Gray watched as Ross's ship approached the station. On the main screen, she could see other ships joining him. Not just human vessels. Federation ships too. Ships whose captains had worked with humans before. Ships whose crews had learned that impossible was just another word for hasn't been done yet. The council members held their breath as Ross's ship fired its first laser. The reactor's containment field flickered but held. Another shot, then another, each blast precisely calculated to weaken the reactor's housing in specific places. This is insanity, one council member whispered. Pure human insanity. But it was working. The reactor's energy readings were changing. The inevitable explosion would now be directed away from the evacuation routes. They were buying time with controlled chaos. 30 minutes until complete evacuation. The Station I announced. Reactor collapse in 32 minutes. Ross's voice came over the channel again. Not good enough. We need more time. There was a pause. Tell everyone to grab their coffee. We're about to try something really stupid. Dr. Gray watched as Ross's ship moved even closer to the reactor. The radiation levels were already far beyond safe limits. The ship's shields were failing. Captain, the Station I warned, your ship's hull is deteriorating. Hull integrity is just a suggestion, Ross replied. Like probability. What happened next would be debated in the council for years to come. Ross used his failing ship as a radiation shield, protecting the evacuation routes. Other ships joined him, forming a barrier between the dying reactor and the fleeing residents. When the reactor finally collapsed, it did so exactly as the humans had planned. The explosion vented into space, away from the residential sections. The last escape pod launched just 2 minutes before the blast. In the council chamber, the final numbers appeared on screen. 12,000 residents evacuated. 0 casualties, 7 ships damaged but repairable, 1 reactor explosion controlled by what the Federation would later call aggressive disregard for probability. Status report, the high speaker requested, their orb glowing with barely contained emotion. Everyone made it, Dr. Gray replied simply, just like we knew they would. The council chamber was silent. For the first time, they were beginning to understand. Humans didn't ignore probability because they were crazy. They ignored it because sometimes that's exactly what was needed. 3 days after the Unity Point incident, Dr. Blue stood before the council. His purple skin had an unusually bright shade, a sign of excitement among his species. Behind him, a massive holographic display showed hundreds of data points from human successes. "Honorable Council," he began, his 4 eyes focused intently on his audience. "The Unity Point rescue has given us the final data we needed. I believe I can now explain the human phenomenon." The chamber was packed. Even species that usually sent robot representatives had come in person. Captain Ross sat next to Dr. Gray, still bandaged from the rescue, but wearing his usual grin. He held his ever-present coffee mug, which now read, "Probability is just a number." "For years," Dr. Blue continued, "we've tried to understand why humans succeed when our calculations say they should fail. We've been asking the wrong question." He paused, letting that sink in. "The real question is, why do they succeed more when we say something is impossible?" The holographic display changed, showing a simple graph. "Look at human success rates. When we calculate a 50% chance of success, humans succeed about 50% of the time, just as expected. But when we calculate a 1% chance of success, humans succeed 30% of the time. At 0% probability, their success rate jumps to 45%. Confused murmurs filled the chamber. The numbers made no sense. "It gets better," Dr. Blue said, almost laughing. "When we tell humans something is impossible, their success rate goes even higher." The Unity Point incident had a calculated 0% chance of success, yet everyone survived. He brought up footage from various human achievements. The pattern is consistent throughout their history. The more we say something can't be done, the more likely humans are to do it. Captain Ross took a loud sip of his coffee, making several council members jump. "But here's the most important discovery," Dr. Blue continued. "It's not just random. Humans don't succeed by accident. They succeed because they try things differently when we say something is impossible." The display showed the Unity Point rescue from multiple angles. "Look at their approach. When we said evacuation was impossible, they didn't try to prove our math wrong. They changed the problem entirely. Instead of trying to prevent the reactor collapse, they controlled it. That wasn't just reckless, it was brilliant." Dr. Blue's excitement was spreading. Some council members were leaning forward in their seats. "Humans don't ignore probability," he explained. "They use our probability calculations as a guide for what not to try. When we say something is impossible one way, they look for completely different ways to do it." He showed more examples: human medical breakthroughs, engineering achievements, space exploration successes. Each time we said impossible, humans took it as a hint to think differently. They don't break the laws of probability. They find paths we never thought to calculate. The high speaker's orb glowed brightly. "Are you suggesting we've been misunderstanding human behavior all along?" "Exactly." Dr. Blue's skin brightened even more. "Their apparent disregard for probability isn't a flaw. It's an evolutionary advantage. Their species survived by finding ways around impossible problems." He turned to face the entire council. "When we say something has a 0% chance of success, we stop trying. Humans hear 0% and say, okay, so that way won't work. Let's try something else." Their strength isn't ignoring probability. Their strength is refusing to let probability stop them from finding another way. The chamber was silent for a moment. Then Captain Ross stood up, his bandages crinkling. "Doc," he said, grinning at Dr. Blue, "you could have just asked us. We'd have told you. There's always another way. You just have to be stubborn enough to find it." Dr. Blue nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly it. And now we have proof. Humans aren't crazy. They're teaching us to think beyond our own limitations." Looking around the chamber, Dr. Gray could see the change in the council members' faces. They were finally beginning to understand. Humans weren't ignoring their careful calculations. They were using them as a map to find new possibilities. It was, she thought with a smile, a very human way of doing things. As Dr. Blue finished his presentation, Dr. Gray stepped up to the council platform. The chamber had changed since her first day here. Instead of fear and concern, she now saw curiosity in the alien faces watching her. "Thank you, Dr. Blue," she began, "for helping everyone understand us better. Now, I'd like to show you something we call calculated recklessness." The holographic display changed to show Earth's history. "Look at these moments," she said. "The first time a human looked at a bird and thought, 'I can do that too.' The images shifted through time. Crude wooden wings, failed flying machines, the Wright brothers' success. Every step of the way, people said it was impossible. Humans are too heavy. The air is too thin. The forces are too strong." She smiled. "But here's what makes humans different. We hear impossible and think we just haven't found the right way yet." Captain Ross nodded from his seat, raising his coffee mug in agreement. "When we wanted to go to space," Dr. Gray continued, "everyone said it couldn't be done. Too dangerous. Too far. Too hard." The display showed early rockets exploding, then succeeding. But we kept trying different approaches until we found ones that worked. She walked around the platform, making eye contact with different council members. "We don't ignore danger. We don't disregard physics. We just refuse to believe that the first failed attempt means all attempts will fail." The display changed to show modern Earth, underwater cities, floating farms, space stations. Every single one of these was called impossible once. But here's our secret. Humans don't care about impossible. We care about what if we try it this way instead. A small, insect-like council member raised an appendage. "But how do you handle the fear of failure?" Dr. Gray laughed softly. "Oh, we're terrified. Every time. But humans learned long ago that being scared and being determined aren't mutually exclusive. We just do things scared." She brought up footage of the Unity Point rescue. "Look at Captain Ross during the rescue. His heart rate was through the roof. He was terrified. But being scared didn't stop him from thinking clearly and finding a solution. The difference," Captain Ross called out from his seat, "is that we're more scared of not trying than we are of failing." "Exactly," Dr. Gray nodded. "In human history, our biggest regrets never came from trying and failing. They came from not trying at all." The display showed more recent events. Human ships working alongside alien vessels, combined crews solving problems together. And now we're seeing something amazing. Other species are learning this approach too. Not because we're changing them, but because we're showing them it's okay to think differently. She pointed to recent rescue missions where alien crews had used human methods to save lives. "You're not becoming more reckless. You're becoming more creative. You're learning that probability isn't a wall. It's just information to help you find another way." The high speaker's orb pulsed thoughtfully. "You're saying we've been limiting ourselves." With respect, Dr. Gray replied, "You've been treating probability like a law instead of a guideline. Humans treat it more like a weather forecast. It's useful information, but it doesn't decide whether we try something or not." She showed one final image. The first contact rescue where Captain Ross had saved the alien ship. "We succeeded that day not because we ignored the danger, but because we looked for solutions your probability calculations hadn't considered. That's not insanity. That's innovation." The chamber was quiet as her words sank in. Then Captain Ross stood up again, his bandages still bright white against his uniform. "Sometimes," he said, "you have to be crazy enough to try before you can be smart enough to succeed." Dr. Gray watched understanding dawn across alien faces. Finally, they were seeing humanity not as reckless, but as determined. Not as probability-defying, but as possibility-finding. It wasn't that humans didn't care about the odds. They just cared more about trying anyway. The High Speaker's orb glowed with multiple colors as they floated to the center of the council chamber. The moment felt historic. For the first time in Federation history, they were about to officially recognize a species' apparent chaos as a legitimate methodology. Based on recent events and the evidence presented, the High Speaker began, their translated voice echoing through the chamber. The Council hereby creates a new classification, the Human Probability Exclusion Zone. Captain Ross nearly choked on his coffee. Dr. Gray patted him on the back, trying not to laugh. Within this classification, the High Speaker continued, human operations will be governed by modified protocols that account for their unique approach to probability. The chamber's main screen displayed the new protocols. 1. Human probability calculations are to be treated as suggestions, not limitations. 2. Human rescue attempts cannot be prevented based on low success probability. 3. Ships with human crew members are authorized to attempt alternative solutions. 4. The phrase impossible is to be replaced with requiring human innovation. Dr. Blue's 4 eyes blinked rapidly as he read the list. His research had actually changed Federation policy. Looking at the protocols, he realized they weren't just accepting human behavior, they were learning from it. The High Speaker turned to face the human representatives. We also have a request. The Federation would like human instructors to teach their problem-solving methods to other species. Now it was Dr. Gray's turn to be surprised. You want us to teach others how to think like humans? Precisely, the High Speaker confirmed. Your species has shown us that there is value in seeing beyond mathematical certainty. We believe others could benefit from this perspective. Captain Ross stood up, his bandages now looking more like badges of honor. Just to be clear, he said, grinning, you want us to teach others how to properly ignore probability. Not ignore, the High Speaker corrected. Transform. You use our calculations of failure as a map to find paths to success. This is a skill worth sharing. The council members, who once feared human recklessness, now nodded in agreement. They had seen too many successful, impossible missions to deny the value of human methods. Furthermore, the High Speaker added, we are creating joint human-alien rescue teams. Each Federation rescue vessel will now have at least one human crew member to provide alternative perspectives. Dr. Gray looked around the chamber. The same aliens who had once called for human quarantine were now eager to work with their species. It was amazing what a few impossible successes could do for interstellar relations. Final item, the High Speaker announced. The Unity Point Station will be rebuilt, and its new reactor design will incorporate Captain Ross's controlled chaos method as a safety feature. Captain Ross raised his coffee mug in salute. Never thought I'd see the day when making things explode in the right direction would become official Federation policy. The chamber filled with what passed for laughter among various species. The tension that had marked earlier meetings was gone, replaced by a sense of possibility. As the session ended, Dr. Gray watched aliens and humans mingling, sharing stories of impossible achievements. Dr. Blue was already organizing the first human thinking training session. Captain Ross was showing a group of alien captains his collection of lucky coffee mugs. You know what the best part is, Captain Ross said, walking over to Dr. Gray. They finally understand. It's not that humans don't care about probability. We just care more about trying. Dr. Gray nodded, watching a young alien officer practicing what she'd heard humans call optimistic stubbornness. So, Ross grinned, checking his ship's status on his tablet, ready to go teach the galaxy how to do the impossible. Of course, Dr. Gray replied, matching his grin. But first, let's do something really impossible. Oh, what's that? Get you to file your mission reports on time. Ross laughed, raising his coffee mug one last time. Now that, he said, might actually be beyond human capabilities. As they left the chamber, the High Speaker watched them go. Perhaps they thought, this was why humans had evolved their strange relationship with probability. In a universe full of impossible things, Sometimes you needed a species crazy enough to try them anyway. The Federation would never be the same. And that was exactly what it needed.